Let's take a look at and explain everything that you need to know for Module 2.2. We're looking at the cardiovascular system, non-communicable diseases, and cancer. Now, make sure you give this video a like, make sure you subscribe as well so you don't miss any of my module explained videos so that you can smash your GCSE exams. We're going to start by thinking about the heart, and we need to know our major blood vessels and major chambers of the heart. We're going to start with our vena cava. Now, this is going to bring blood from the body into the right atrium. Now, remember that the sides of the heart are kind of flipped round. So in our diagram here, what's on the left-hand side is actually the right-hand side of the heart. The right atrium then leads into the right ventricle. And between the atria and the ventricles, we also have a valve here. The valve is there to prevent the backflow of blood, so that when the ventricle contracts, the blood goes out through the arteries and not back into the atrium. So speaking of that artery, we have our pulmonary artery here. And we have our pulmonary vein returning the blood back to the heart. Now, this makes part of the circuit that goes via the lungs. This is where the blood is going to become oxygenated. So the blood is transporting oxygen and other substances around the body. When the blood passes through the lungs, it picks up oxygen by diffusion from the alveoli. That's then going to be carried back to the heart. And then the left side of the heart is going to pump that blood around the body. In the body, the blood is going to lose its oxygen. It's going to diffuse into the tissues and be used for aerobic respiration. So when it returns to the heart in the vena cava, it's going to be deoxygenated. So the right-hand side of the heart is deoxygenated, the left-hand side of the heart is oxygenated. The pulmonary vein leads into the left atrium, which then goes into the left ventricle. And again, we have a valve between them. The left ventricle then leads out of the heart through the aorta, another type of artery. And we can see we have another valve between the left ventricle and the aorta, again to prevent the backflow of blood. We also have the very tip of the heart, which is called the apex. Now, the heart is muscle tissue. And we can see that the left ventricle, the thickness of the ventricle wall is greater than the right ventricle. And that is because the left ventricle is going to contract with more force in order to achieve a higher pressure. And to achieve that higher pressure, it is necessary because the blood is being pumped all of the way around the body. So it has to be pumped further than the right ventricle, which is just pumping the blood to the lungs. It doesn't have to go as far. Because the heart is made of muscle tissue, it's going to be respiring, which means it needs its own blood supply as well. So coming off of the aorta very, very quickly is the coronary arteries. And the coronary arteries supply the heart muscle with oxygen. More to come on the coronary arteries when we talk about coronary heart disease. Now, to transport the blood around the body, the cardiovascular system uses blood vessels. This makes it a closed system. There are three types of blood vessels we need to know about. The first is an artery. Now, arteries carry blood away from the heart. And the artery has a few adaptations for that. Because it is coming away from the heart, it's going to be at high pressure. And in order to maintain that high pressure, so that the blood is transported all the way around the body, the arteries have a narrow lumen. The lumen is the hole down the middle of the blood vessel. As well as the narrow lumen, it has a thick layer of muscle and a thick layer of elastic or connective tissue. Now, the muscle and the elastic tissue, that is going to be there to withstand that high pressure. The blood that's coming out of the aorta is at really, really high pressure. And if it only had a thin wall to it, then that could lead to the blood vessel rupturing. Our next type of blood vessel is a vein. Now the veins carry blood towards the heart. The vein has a few adaptations as well. Now, because the blood is flowing at a lower pressure, because it's already gone through the tissues, the vein has a larger lumen. It also has the muscle and elastic tissue, but they are thinner. And as well as the muscle and elastic tissue, in order to prevent the backflow of blood, to prevent it going the wrong direction, the veins also have valves. Now, why would the backflow of blood be a problem? Why would it be bad for blood to flow from the ventricles into the atria or to go backwards through the blood vessels? Well, the problem is it means that the deoxygenated blood is then going to be going in the wrong direction. And there would be a mixing of deoxygenated and oxygenated blood, which was then going to reduce the delivery of oxygen to the muscles. Remember, the cardiovascular system is all about transporting oxygen to the muscle tissue for respiration. And if we reduce the amount of oxygen that's being delivered, that's going to reduce the ability for the individual to exercise, perhaps. Our third type of blood vessels are the capillaries. Now the capillaries, this is the site of exchange. This is where the substances are diffusing in or out of the blood vessels. And our adaptations here, our main one is that the walls of the capillary are 1 cell thick. And thinking about how that links to factors affecting the rates of diffusion, go check out my module 1 video if you want to see that broken down in all of its detail. The walls being 1 cell thick means that the diffusion distance is going to be reduced, therefore increasing the rate of diffusion. We can also see that the capillaries are much narrower. And by being narrower, what this is going to do is this is going to reduce the distance from the red blood cells to the walls of the capillary. These blood vessels are not to scale. The capillaries are many times smaller than the arteries and the veins. So alongside the blood vessels, let's talk about the blood itself. Now, blood is a bit of a funny one. Blood is actually a tissue because it is made up of multiple cell types that carry out the same function, i.e. transporting substances around the body. There's 4 key components to the blood. The first one is the plasma. Now the plasma is the yellowish fluid that forms the blood. Now the plasma is involved in transporting dissolved substances such as carbon dioxide, other waste substances like urea, but also things like glucose and amino acids. And all of the other cell types are also within that plasma. So one of those cell types would be the red blood cell. Now the red blood cell contains the protein hemoglobin. And the role of that hemoglobin is it is involved in the transporting of oxygen. The red blood cell also has a few specialist adaptations. Again, go check out my module 1 video where I broke down different types of specialized cells. But it has a biconcave shape to increase the surface area and no nucleus to make more space for hemoglobin. We also have our white blood cell. And the white blood cell, this forms part of our immune system. The white blood cell is involved in identifying and destroying pathogens. There are a few different types of white blood cells, and go check out my module 3 video where I break down the immune response and the way that the white blood cells are involved in protecting us against pathogens. Our final part of the blood are the platelets. And the platelets are fragments of cells. And what they do is they form this network that then helps the blood to clot. Now, sometimes blood clots can be bad, but sometimes they are important. If you cut yourself and your blood does not clot, then there would be nothing to stop the blood from leaving your body. The blood clot will eventually dry out to form a scab, and that is also going to protect the body and protect any entry of pathogens into the body as well. Sometimes though, a blood clot might be a bad thing because it might block the blood vessel and might therefore reduce the delivery of blood and therefore oxygen around the body. The role of our cardiovascular system is to transport oxygen and other substances around the body. But how does the oxygen get into the body? That's the role of the respiratory system. Our respiratory system starts with our nasal cavity. Our nasal cavity consists of our nose and our mouth, and as we breathe in, the air then passes down through our windpipe. Technical term for this is our trachea. Now, the trachea has a few different adaptations. It has rings of cartilage that help keep the trachea open whilst the air is moving down. And as well as that, it also produces mucus and has ciliated cells that help to protect against pathogens. The trachea connect to the bronchi, which are the two major branches that go into each lung. So the lung is the organ here. Now, after the bronchi, we have the bronchioles, and the bronchioles are the branching off of the bronchi, and at the end of the bronchioles are the alveoli. The alveoli are the air sacs where gas exchange takes place. Check out my other videos for module 1 where I broke down all of the adaptations of the alveoli in order to increase gas exchange. Surrounding the lungs, we have the ribs or the rib cage. And between the ribs, we have the intercostal muscles. There is another muscle associated with the respiratory system, and that is the diaphragm. So how do we breathe in and out? Well, it's all to do with these muscles. When we breathe in, or what we call inspiration, the diaphragm contracts. As that diaphragm contracts, it's going to move downwards. And when it moves downwards, that's going to increase the volume of the chest, or what we might refer to as the thoracic cavity, or maybe the volume of the lungs, we could say as well. If we decrease the volume, increase the volume, that is going to decrease the pressure. And if the pressure in the lungs is less than the pressure outside in the atmosphere, the air is going to move in down that pressure gradient. What about when we breathe out? Well, when we breathe out, the diaphragm relaxes, but as well as the diaphragm relaxing, the intercostal muscles contract. And the alveoli have an elastic wall. And that elastic wall is going to recoil, a bit like an elastic band. So the alveoli recoil. All of this together is going to decrease the volume. And if the volume of the chest decreases, well, then the pressure increases. And the air is then going to leave out through the nasal cavity. So in this module, alongside the cardiovascular system and the respiratory system, we also need to have a look at some non-communicable diseases and health. So what do we mean by health? So health is a state of physical and mental well-being. It's about how these two interact together in order to leave somebody feeling well. And our physical well-being might be affected by disease. And we have two different types of diseases. Our first type is a communicable disease, and a communicable disease is one that can be transferred. Now, communicable diseases are usually caused by pathogens, and I break down all of the different types of pathogens you need to know about in my Module 3 explained video. So go check that out. We also have non-communicable diseases, and a non-communicable disease is just one that cannot be transferred. There's a few non-communicable diseases that we're going to talk about, things like coronary heart disease, diabetes, perhaps as well. Now, those diseases, they cannot be transferred. You cannot catch them from a different person. They are usually associated with risk factors. A risk factor is something that increases the likelihood of developing a disease. It doesn't necessarily guarantee that you will develop that disease, but it increases the chance of developing that disease. There are lots of risk factors. We can think of things like smoking, drinking alcohol, diet, lack of exercise, stress, lack of sleep. Those are all examples of risk factors. There are some risk factors that there is no choice element to. So for example, someone's genetics, someone's ethnicity, someone's age as well. Risk factors can also interact with each other. Someone who smokes, maybe they struggle to exercise, which means they have a lack of exercise. Maybe someone who has a poor diet might also be obese, which means again they struggle to exercise as well. So risk factors can interact to make things worse potentially and to increase the likelihood even more of developing a certain disease. So let's take a look at 3 examples of risk factors in a bit more detail. The first one we're going to look at is smoking. Now, smoking cigarettes contains 3 major chemicals. The first one is tar. Now, tar is a carcinogen, which means that it causes cancer. More on cancer to follow. It also contains nicotine. Now, nicotine is a highly addictive substance. It also increases blood pressure. And smoking contains carbon monoxide. Carbon monoxide binds to the hemoglobin and prevents oxygen from binding, so reduces the amount of oxygen that can be delivered around the body. Vaping is also quite bad alongside smoking. Vaping doesn't contain tar, it doesn't contain carbon monoxide, but it does contain a very high amount of nicotine. So again, highly addictive and also increasing blood pressure. Vaping also contains heavy metals, which could lead to cancer as well. Now, there's a few diseases associated with smoking. Smoking can cause cancer, as we said, particularly lung cancer. It can also cause really serious effects if someone was to smoke whilst pregnant. Smoking while someone is pregnant is going to reduce the amount of oxygen that is being delivered to the fetus. This could then lead to miscarriage or stillbirth. It could also lead to deformities. Alongside smoking, another really big risk factor is alcohol consumption. Alcohol is a carcinogen. Alcohol is also addictive. And alcohol is then processed by the liver. The liver breaks down the alcohol in order to try and remove it from the blood. This has an effect on the liver and could lead to cancer. Again, drinking alcohol whilst pregnant also has really serious side effects or serious consequences. Diseases such as fetal alcohol syndrome, where the fetus is used to that increased alcohol level, and then once the baby is born, that can then have really serious effects. And there's an increased chance of miscarriage and deformities again. Our third risk factor is your diet. Now, there's lots of different components to a good, healthy diet. Two examples of a bad diet might be a high-fat diet or a high cholesterol diet. If someone has a high-fat diet, this could lead to coronary heart disease, which we are going to talk more about in a second. Another example of a poor diet might be a high sugar diet. Now, a high sugar diet could lead towards diabetes. Check out my module 5 video even, where I break down diabetes and explain the causes of diabetes. So let's take a look at coronary heart disease in a little bit more detail. So one of the biggest risk factors for coronary heart disease is a high-fat diet. Now, this high-fat diet, particularly high in cholesterol, leads to a buildup of cholesterol in the coronary arteries. And we can see that here. This might be referred to as a fatty plaque. What this has done, this has narrowed the blood vessel. And by narrowing the blood vessel, what this is going to do is reduce blood flow. Now, the blood flow is super important. Remember, the blood transports the oxygen. So by reducing that blood flow, less oxygen is going to be transported to the heart muscle. The coronary arteries provide the heart muscle with oxygen. And if we get less blood flow, that means we get a reduction in the amount of oxygen to the muscle. If there's less oxygen transported to the muscle, that means we're going to get less aerobic respiration, which means we're going to get less energy released for muscle contraction. And we're going to then potentially see that the heart stops. The heart stops beating. So how is coronary heart disease treated? Well, one of the first treatments is the use of statins. Statins are a medication which reduces the amount of cholesterol in the blood, so stops the fatty plaque from forming. If the fatty plaque has already formed, however, then we might need to use a stent. Now, a stent is inserted into the blocked blood vessel. The stent is then expanded, and this restores the blood vessel, restoring blood flow. It does that by widening the blood vessel, allowing the blood to flow, so allowing the oxygen to be delivered to the heart muscle again. So in an exam, you might be asked to evaluate different treatments for some diseases. And you might be asked to evaluate treatments for coronary heart disease, thinking about stents and statins. Whenever you do an evaluation, you need to think of three different things. We need to think about our positives, our reasons for, our advantages. We need to think about our negatives, our reasons against or our disadvantages, and a conclusion. When you do your evaluation, you must consider all three parts for all of the things that you are evaluating. So we must consider the advantages and the disadvantages of stents and the advantages and disadvantages of statins. So let's talk about the advantages of stents first. Well, the stents keep the arteries open. It also has an immediate impact and a long-term effectiveness. Once that stent has been fitted, it theoretically should last for the rest of the person's life. This can be done once that person already has the plaque that has built up. But there's some big disadvantages. There's a big risk of complications. It requires surgery. The surgery is quite delicate. There's a chance of that surgery going wrong. There is a possibility of blood clots, and blood clots might then further restrict the blood flow. And there is issues with cost and access. The surgery is costly, that means less people can receive that surgery potentially. Now, a really common argument that people use in evaluate questions is around this idea of cost. And this is one you have to be careful with because it's not that often accepted on mark schemes. In the UK, we have the NHS. Theoretically, healthcare is free to all individuals, so cost theoretically isn't an issue. However, if the procedure is more costly, that perhaps means that waiting times will be longer because fewer hospitals are able to carry out that procedure, perhaps. Now, statins have the advantage that they lower the cholesterol. Statins are more of a preventative treatment. They also reduce the heart disease risk and have long-term benefits. The disadvantages, though, are that the person would have to take them probably for the rest of their life. There is also the chance of side effects, particularly things like headaches. And there's the potential for people to not take the statins, which then is going to lead to the buildup of that fatty plaque, which then is going to lead to that heart disease risk as well. Another example of diseases or issues that someone could have with their heart might be an issue with one of the heart valves or an issue with the entire heart itself. Now, the valves might need to be replaced because they might become faulty and might lead to leakage and the blood going in the wrong direction. And that would reduce the delivery of oxygen around the body. So we have our mechanical or biological valves that can be used for that. Now, the uses of these valves are to replace the damaged or faulty heart valves to restore the proper blood flow and reduce the heart strain. The advantages of both of these are that the mechanical valves are very durable. They are going to last a very long time. And the biological valves are, because they have come from perhaps pig tissue or from a heart donor, they are going to function more naturally and they're also going to be quieter. The mechanical valves, there is a risk of blood clots and there is a possible kind of noise that might come from these valves. Whereas the biological valves, they may need replacing and there is a risk of immune rejection where the immune system recognizes the foreign tissue, the foreign cells that have been put into the heart and leads to an immune response to try and remove those. So the patient might have to take immunosuppressant drugs in order to stop that immune rejection. And if they're taking immunosuppressant drugs, that is then going to reduce the action of their immune system, potentially leaving them more vulnerable to other diseases. We've also got some general surgical considerations about both of these valve replacements. Both of them require major surgery as well, and there is a big risk associated with that. We also have our different hearts, so an artificial heart or an entire heart transplant. Now, an artificial heart might be used as a temporary solution to keep patients alive until a suitable donor heart is found. Quite often the person would be attached to a machine that would pump the blood around their body. This is very, very restrictive and the patient would have to remain in hospital the entire time. The heart transplant, however, could be used to replace a failing heart. A heart donor, a person who has recently died, who has a healthy heart, their heart might be able to be transplanted into the patient with heart disease and to replace the faulty heart. Now, each of these has potential advantages. So the artificial hearts, there is no wait time and there's no chance of tissue rejection either. Whereas the heart transplants, well, this is a long-term solution. Once the heart transplant has taken place, it should stay there for the rest of the person's life. And it also means that they're going to be more active and have a better quality of life and their lifestyle might potentially return to normal. But the disadvantages, well, the artificial hearts can potentially cause blood clots. There's a risk of the mechanical failure of the machine. It requires an external power source, so is quite often restrictive. And although there's no wait time, they're often expensive and not necessarily that widely available. And the heart transplants, well, we rely on donor availability. There's often a waiting list for the heart transplants because a transplant can only take place when a suitable donor, has become available. And because it is someone else's cells that are being transplanted into the patient's body, there is a risk of immune rejection as a result, and the person would have to take immunosuppressant drugs. The last type of heart disease that we need to talk about is a faulty heart rhythm or an irregular heartbeat. Now, the heartbeat is controlled by the pacemaker cells, which are in the right atrium of the heart. And if those pacemaker cells are faulty, then an artificial pacemaker could be fitted, and that would produce an electrical current which would stimulate the heart to contract, restoring the correct regular heart rate. Our last thing to talk about then is cancer. Cancer is another example of a non-communicable disease. And cancer is caused by uncontrolled cell division. Now, this uncontrolled cell division is caused by mutations, and there are certain substances that might increase the chance of those mutations taking place. These we call carcinogens. Examples of carcinogens would be things like tar in cigarette smoke, alcohol as well, but also UV light that might cause mutations that might lead to skin cancer, and other types of ionizing radiation like X-rays and gamma rays as well. Now, the uncontrolled cell division is going to form a tumour, and there are two different types of tumour. Our first type of tumour is a benign tumour. Now, the benign tumour is surrounded by a membrane. This means that the cancerous cells, the cells that are dividing uncontrollably, are held within the membrane. So as a result, the benign tumour does not spread. It stays within one area of the body. Because of this, that means that it's usually slightly less severe. It has less of an effect and is less dangerous as a result. That does not mean that it is completely undangerous and is completely safe, because depending on where the benign tumour is, it could grow to be such a size that it puts pressure on other organs. Some patients might have had benign tumours the size of a football removed from their abdominal cavity because it is putting pressure on their stomachs, their intestines, their kidneys perhaps. Our other type of tumour is a malignant tumour. Now, malignant tumour is when the cells break out of this membrane. And when those cells break out, they are going to spread through the bloodstream to other parts of the body. And where they spread to other parts of the body, they are then going to grow and form other tumours as well. These we call secondary tumours. Because of this, malignant tumours and the way that they spread, they are more dangerous. They can spread and start forming tumours on vital organs such as the lungs, the brain, the stomach as well. So how do we treat cancer? Well, there's three main ways we can treat cancer. The first is surgery, using an operation to remove the tumour. Now, this is really only possible with benign tumours because they are within one place. A malignant tumour that has spread around the body, we can't use surgery to go and remove the tumours because there's simply too many of them. Our other type of treatment is radiotherapy. A small dose of ionizing radiation might act to cause mutations. A larger dose will kill the cells. This is why radiation can be used for sterilizing equipment, because it kills any pathogens. Now, if we focus a beam of radiation onto a specific part of the body using the radiation coming in from multiple different angles, that's going to increase the dose of radiation into that one specific location, and that means those cells are going to be killed. Again, radiotherapy is usually only that useful for benign tumours or malignant tumours before they spread. It's also non-invasive, which makes it potentially a slightly better form of treatment than surgery, but can be quite difficult to target and aim the beams of radiation. Our final type of cancer treatment is chemotherapy. Now, chemotherapy is where certain chemicals that kill cells or stop cell division are administered into the body. Now, the tumours, because they are dividing rapidly and uncontrollably, they are going to be using up lots and lots of resources and nutrients. That means that they usually have a very, very big blood supply. If the chemotherapy drug is in the blood, the tumour will take up more of that chemotherapy drug than the surrounding cells as well. This means that the tumour will receive more of that drug, and so the tumour will be killed and reduce in size. But the other cells will still take up some of that drug, and so the healthy cells will still be affected. And this is why chemotherapy often has lots of really severe side effects, such as nausea and hair loss associated with it. So those are our potential treatments for cancer. There we go, all of module 2.2 explained and broken down for you. Make sure you give the video a like, make sure you subscribe as well so you don't miss any other of my explainer videos, and also click that bell to make sure you get notified as soon as they get released.